Wormgod's Caress got probably the best buff of all exotics this season, making them way more viable to use while still offering the exact same melee damage increase. Originally, I posted this Strand Titan build, which is insane. Definitely go check that out if you guys haven't yet. I would say it's probably the best Titan build currently, but in this video, I wanted to cover another build for solo Titans, which is also extremely strong using Wormgod's Caress. Within the build, we can easily handle all three champion types. Radiant is fully intrinsic to the build itself, so every weapon will have access to breaking anti-barrier shields, and then the weapons we default to are also going to be able to handle both unstops and overloads if we need it. I took this into mostly lost sectors just to showcase the champions, but I think in most cases, if you were to use Wormgods in a GM, it would be pretty hard for the average player to main stacks, especially if you don't have all the spawn points memorized. But swapping to something like Synthoceps is going to make the build effectively just as strong, and it's way easier to use in any setting. The build also has access to a lot of healing. Every melee final blow should be spawning in an Orb of Power, which we can collect and heal ourselves through the use of mods. Each time we pick up our hammer after getting a hit on an enemy, we're also getting healing. And then with Sunspots, we are constantly going to be having Restoration ×1 for passive healing over time. And then most important to the build when it comes to stacking damage for our melee, just showing it off against Carl here, our base melee hits for 11,783, and our hammer hits for 39,143. With Burning Fist active at ×5, which is from Wormgods, our base melee now hits for 44,000, and our hammer now for 146,000. So this is a solid 275% or 3.75x increase. Then with Roaring Flames ×3, on the other hand, our base melee goes up to 20,000 and our hammer goes up to 67,000. So this is a 73% increase, which is also going to allow us to ignite enemies with multiple base melee hits for even more damage and ad clear. So if you end up stacking these together, we should be able to get around 550% increased damage in our melee without even using a debuff. This build is amazing, and I think it offers a way better balance between weapon use and ability use compared to the Strand Titan. That way you can use your hammer and your melee whenever you need it, and then your weapons and your super anytime else. Before I get into the full build and everything you need to run, I did start streaming on YouTube. I always go live both here and on Twitch now, so if you guys like watching some endgame content like lowmans, speedruns, and raids, or if you enjoyed the 0 to Hero challenge videos, all that is filmed live on both Twitch and YouTube now. Okay guys, starting things off, this is the full loadout / setup that I run for the most part, and I'll be going over a couple of substitutions you guys can make if you wanted to, just depending on the playstyle or the activity you're on. So just in our direct inventory, we are running Wormgods. If you wanted, for ease of use, you could also run Synthoceps. This is just going to give you that damage bonus when surrounded, rather than needing to actually get melee kills to stack up. We're just missing out on the full damage potential for our melee, and obviously Wormgods does now give you increased weapon damage as well, so that is super nice. Weapon-wise, Riptide is really good, especially with Chill Clip. Any Chill Clip weapon will work if you wanted to run something else. This is great for dealing with overload champions because once they get slowed, that stuns them. Even if they don't effectively get stunned, as you're going to see in some of the gameplay, you'll shoot them with a Chill Clip round. It won't stun them, but they're still going to lose that healing over time that they get when they're not stunned. Super buggy. They definitely need to fix this, but either which way, you can still use this to get the kill because the overloads aren't going to be healing through all the damage that you're dealing. After that, we do have Sunshot. This is to extend Radiant effect and also to deal with unstopped champions. So we effectively have infinite Radiant with this build so that we can also deal with any anti-barriers that we need as well. And then lastly, if you wanted that extra 30% increase in damage from a Tractor Cannon or a Tether, you could swap over to Zali's Bane, free up your exotic slots, and then easily run Tractor Cannon yourself if you wanted to. Within our Solar subclass for our main abilities, I've been rocking Hammer of Soul. I like this super a little bit better than Burning Maul. Burning Maul usually has some better damage potential depending on the boss, I believe, but I think Hammer of Soul just has more ease of use. It's more viable in a lot of different situations. After that, I have been rocking Towering Barricade, mainly because I've been using this build up against champions, which will 1 or 2 shot me still. So for that reason, having a full-size barricade to hide behind anytime I need my melee to come back or I'm regenerating abilities or health, this is super nice. After that, we are obviously on our Throwing Hammer so that we can spam this. Even with, I think, the 1.4 second cooldown that we have, it's still super usable. We can throw this hammer, hit extremely hard, get Cure, proc Restoration through things like Sunspots, and then once we pick it up and we have it on cooldown, we can just use our base melee in between each hammer throw, and it still allows us to supplement our damage, trigger ignitions, things like that. And then finally, we do have Thermite Grenade. I like running this grenade. You can run whatever you really want here. I wouldn't recommend a healing grenade because we'll get restoration pretty much infinitely through other means. The reason I rock Thermite is because it's almost like shooting a wave frame shot at the ground. I can quickly get up to ×3 Roaring Flames for that 73% ability damage increase, which allows me to instantly go into my throwing hammer for more damage. As I mentioned, with our first aspect, Roaring Flames, as we get solar ability or ignition final blows, that is going to give us a stacking increase in damage, which is the Roaring Flame buff, up to 3 total stacks, where the max stacks give us a 73% increase in damage to our abilities. I'm pretty sure it's 73%. They might have changed it. It's a really weird number. I'll put it on screen if it's anything different, but that's still a massive increase, especially because it stacks with Synthoceps, with things like Wormgod Caress, and increases our throwing hammer damage. And then second to this, and how we're getting sunspots with the build, is obviously Soul Invictus. Solar ability final blows anytime we have Hammer of Soul Impact, which is, again, our super, or we are killing scorched targets, we are creating sunspots at that enemy's location. Whenever we're inside of that, we are getting restoration ×1, which is why we don't really need healing grenades on the build. We're getting increased ability regen, and we're also draining our super much slower. Plus, these sunspots are going to be dealing direct damage and applying more scorch stacks to enemies inside them as well. Finally, we have 4 fragments. Up first is Ember of Ashes. This is going to increase our scorch stacks we apply by 50%. This is massive. For whatever reason, I think it's with Roaring Flames. Whenever we have 1 or more stacks up, our base melee technically counts almost as a charged melee ability. So for that reason, we can have Roaring Flames up, punch something with just our base melee, and it also applies scorch stacks. With Ember of Ashes equipped, that 50% bonus is enough to make 3 base melee punches. As long as they're back to back to back and no scorch damage is falling off, that's going to create an ignition on that enemy, which is a ton of extra damage and really good ad clear for us. So Ember of Ashes helps a ton with this build. Since we're using our hammer a lot, Ember of Torches is going to allow us to proc Radiant for ourselves and nearby teammates. And then with Radiant, we also have Ember of Empyrean. So sunspots give us restoration, our hammer gives us Radiant, and then with any solar weapon or ability final blow, we are extending the duration of both those effects. And then finally, I didn't really think too many things fit directly into the build. Originally, I was messing with Ember of Char to kind of chain some ignitions with our base melees, but it didn't really work out too well. So I just opted for Ember of Singeing, especially since here and there we will eventually lose our throwing hammer and the cycle of the build is really going to drop off. So for that reason, with Ember of Singeing and our base melees, because they apply Scorch, we can quickly build class abilities like our Towering Barricade, place those down, and give ourselves direct energy back to our throwing hammer through the use of some of our mods. Lastly, to end the video off, on screen right now are all the mods we're using on the build. You guys can pause it, apply them in game yourself. As always, we will still have a dim link, so if you want to just click once and apply through dim, we'll have that down below, and a Mobalytics build link if you guys want more build info. I didn't feel like too many mods really helped the build that much just because of Wormgods being super strong and Solar being also really strong for helping us survive and giving increased damage. Just to build super faster, we have 2 copies of Hands On. You could sub one of these out for something like a Harmonic Siphon for more Orb Gen if you wanted to, but our Orb Gen is pretty good with the build as is. On our gauntlets, and the reason that Orb Gen is good is because we just have 3 copies of Heavy Handed. It really sucks to need to do 3 copies in my opinion, but with 3 copies applied, this gives us a 1-second cooldown, down from 10 seconds for how often we can spawn an orb with a powered melee final blow. And the real reason we want these is through some of our mods on our boots, which we'll be going over in a second. On our chest piece, as always, we just have 3 copies of damage resistance mods. Just apply this in endgame content, especially whenever you're taking damage from a particular source, and then double or triple them up if you're taking a lot of damage from one source specifically. Like in this case, I was taking a lot of void and solar damage, so I had 2 void and then 1 solar. On our legs, one of the most important mods, I think, for the build, especially in endgame content, we're running around taking a ton of damage, just aggroing enemies. So for that reason, recuperation is great. Every time that we get a melee kill with our hammer, we are dropping an orb of power pretty much because of the 3 copies of Heavy Handed we have on our gauntlets. So we pick that up, we get 70 HP straight back from recuperation, along with the cure from our hammer as well. We also build increased grenade energy through innervation, and because I didn't feel like we were really using the armored charge stacks that much, I just opted for Solar Weapon Surge. This is going to be 10% increased solar weapon damage. When Synthos are fully stacked, we get another 35% weapon damage across the board, and when we have Radiant, that's another 25% on top of that. So that stacks up pretty quickly to really help our solar weapon get final blows in a rapid fashion when under power. And then finally, on our class item, not a lot of these mods are super important. You guys can sub these out depending on your playstyle. We have Outreach, which I do really like because we can place down our barricade and quickly build our hammer back up if we manage to lose it, throw it off the map, something like that. We also have Special Finisher, especially in like a raid or maybe a dungeon setting when you're doing multiple damage phases. This is really good and is another great way to kind of burn some of those armor charge stacks if you don't find that you really need them for the surges, so you gen ammo for you and teammates. And then lastly, I still like running Powerful Attraction. We can place down our barricade, and if there's a ton of orbs of power nearby, get a really quick boost in healing through picking up a ton of recuperation orbs. Let me know your thoughts on the build, guys, in the comments down below, and if you think Throwing Hammer deserved the cooldown nerf it got this season. Once again, I now dual stream over on Twitch and YouTube, and we started running our next challenge raid series where we attempt to do each raid flawlessly while using random loadouts during each encounter. Come drop by if you ever want to watch live. As always, have a good one, guys. Peace.